So now I'm down here. I'm going to pull the engine, trans, and transfer case out of our frame and take a better look, see what I can salvage and what I have to replace. So to get that out, first thing we're going to do is pull the drive shafts. Now we'll pull the rear off. Now we're going to disconnect the wiring and anything else that's holding the trans to the motor. Dipstick, some fuel lines, trans cooler lines on the other side. Now we're going to disconnect the exhaust. If my calculations are correct, and occasionally they are, I think everything should be disconnected. We did the trans mount earlier. There's no reason to disconnect the bell housing bolts, and I had already done the torque converter, so it should be ready to just lift it out. Yes, that was the transfer case housing cracking. Now it's no good, I gotta throw it away. Now we're gonna pull what's left of the radiator support and the cooling out. I will pull off what's left of our fan shroud. And we got the fuel lines. Okay, the only thing I should have left are a few motor mount bolts. Okay, if my calculations are correct for the second time today, everything should be disconnected and the motor is ready to come out. Let's see how this goes. I'm just going to take the wiring harness and everything right with it. So I had a lot of comments about a broken block. I've looked it over and I can't see anything broken on the block itself. What I can see is this housing back here is broke. It's the back of the block. The block is cast iron. That's aluminum. Let's take the flywheel off and see what's underneath it. There's our cover. Bolts onto the back here. And here's our new one. Believe it or not, this entire back housing was only $100. Pretty reasonable for dealer prices. So we're gonna swap that out. The first thing we'll do is take off our heat shields. They were rusted on there, so just a couple little taps and they came off. And we can pull our exhaust pipes off. Just the one. Gave me a little room to get to those cooler lines on the top. Now we're gonna take the oil cooler off. It's cracked. I won't be able to put the new one on because I'm gonna use the one off the used motor. So I gotta wait till I take that truck apart. Now we're gonna pull the starter off. Now we're gonna pull the heater hoses off. A little bit of oil and some prying and wiggling and they pop off if they're corroded. Pull all the bolts out of the back housing. I marked the long ones, that's what the little L's are on the housing. There are 4 long ones. I just want to make sure I get them back in the right spot. All the rest are the same. I'm going to take the lower oil pan off. There's 4 bolts that go from the bottom up through the upper oil pan and into that cover we're changing. So I have to take this off. I did get a new one because this one has a big dent on the front. So that was another reason I had to change it. There's our big dent. I'm going to take that cover off. I'm going to take off what's left of the rear main seal. Just pry it off, work it around a little bit at a time on each side. And I'll pop off there. We're going to save this because we're going to need it in a little bit. Take off our gaskets and clean up our mounting surfaces. We put our new RTV silicone on there and our new gaskets. Now we'll put the cover back on. Put our 4 long bolts in there first. And we'll put all the rest of them in. Just going to start them a couple threads and then we'll run them in with the impact. Not tight, just snug, and then we'll torque them down. But running them in with the impact saves me a lot of turning of the ratchet. As long as you don't tighten it, it doesn't hurt anything. Now putting the studs back in for the cooler lines up on top. I could have put those in ahead of time, but it would have been harder to work around them. So this way I just screw the studs in, tighten them up, and then put the nuts on. And put a little oil on the crankshaft so we can slide our rear main seal in there. Makes things go a little easier. Got our new rear main seal. I'm going to use our old one here to tap the bottom portion in, the part that seats on the crank itself. After we get that in a little bit, we'll tap the outer part in with the block of wood. Go a little bit at a time, working your way around. Go back and forth between the seating the side of the crank and the housing. Takes a lot of patience so you don't ruin that seal. Got all that done. Now we're going to part our exhaust pipe back on. Got new gaskets for it, so we'll thread the bolts in and tighten them down. Put our heat shields back on. tighten them all down. So we've gone about as far as we can go on this motor for right now. The rest of the parts that we need, like the flywheel, the motor mounts, the oil filter housing, and the fan, that's all going to come off the parts truck. And right now the parts truck is still all together and runs. So until I get it in and dismantle it, I can't use those parts. If you're wondering why I put any time and money into this motor, here's your answer. That lower oil pan, that rear cover, and all the gaskets I used cost me about 200 bucks. So I'm taking a $200 gamble that this motor is going to be good. I had a lot of comments saying that it's junk, so we'll see what happens. I could send it out and have it rebuilt and be sure, but that just adds more to the build that I don't need to factor in. I priced in a bad motor to begin with. If this motor ends up being good, I have the motor to sell out of the other truck. These things sell from $7,000 to $10,000 with 40,000 miles on. So I'm willing to take a risk of $200 and a little bit of labor. Worst case scenario, the motor's bad and I just have to swap the old one back in. And I did the work for nothing. Not a big deal. We'll see what the future holds. We got a long ways to go before we find out if this motor's good. But subscribe if you want to find out. Like the video if you found it interesting. Share it if you think somebody else might. Also subscribe if you want to see some of my other videos on other cars and some of the tutorials I do. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.